As a person who's also from Odesa, I have a question. As far as we see, Russia have a narrative about Odesa being a piece of the Russian world. How pro-Ukrainian citizens who live in Odesa can combat that, even if our mayor is pro-Russian and he's a well-known Russian citizen and he still fights for keeping Pushkin and Catherine II statue in the center of Odesa? What we can do to combat that and what we can do to make Ukraine finally like Ukrainian city and be the last pieces of the Russian culture out of there? Thank you.
Thank you for this very complex question. When we speak about Russian narratives, we should understand that there are different narratives. The one is like Russian official narrative, and the second one, which you mentioned about Mayor of Odesa, Trukhanov. As a rule, these people think that Odesa neither Russian, neither Ukrainian. It is something like something by itself. Of course, it is extremely hard to fight this narrative. I think that we should continue to share images of Ukrainian Odesa because it is true. For instance, we can recall that numerous Ukrainian writers like Taras Shevchenko, Lesya Ukrainka, Ivan Franko visited Odesa, and for instance, for now, it is still no monument to Lesya Ukrainka in Odesa. And the Ukrainian community is Odesa. Just you get it. So Ukrainian people in Odesa, they are trying to fight for this monument. Local authorities in Odesa are not very happy about it, but still on 24th on February, just 2 days from this conference, there will be like a gathering of Ukrainian community to promote this topic once again, and it would be like fundraising campaign for this monument. So I think we should be creative, we should be persistent, we should use Odesa cats to catch attention, because Odesa cat is like a meme. For that, we should remember that Odesa is actively fighting against Russians, and you can see it is like coffee, this Moskva worship described. We should use images, should use memes, and should continue our fight. That's all that I can say for this question.
I was quite interested with the conversation we were having in session 2 about kind of digital warfare, and tying a little bit to what both of you mentioned about resistance here. And so I kind of wanted to tie a little bit both of these together. This is maybe a conversation that's a little difficult to have. Difficult because the information is so limited, and I'm referring to kind of the activities in the occupied regions of Ukraine. In your experiences, how are Ukrainians in the occupied regions engaging in combating disinformation as a form of national resistance? What initiatives, much like how we heard with Stop Fake, what initiatives exist to achieve this? In other words, how are civil society and other organizations throughout Ukraine empowering those in the occupied communities to combat disinformation, if those exist? Thank you. Дякую.
It depends, of course, if we speak about occupied territories. Of course, it is extremely dangerous for people from occupied territories to read this Ukrainian content, and their phones may be monitored by special forces, and of course, it is they can come to prison and be tortured and killed. But the survey, which was made by Internews in Ukraine, they reached people on the occupied territories, and they asked them about their visions. I just can share you the link, and you can read their findings. You mentioned like communities on the occupied territories. I don't think that it is like a relevant term, because of course, if we speak about occupied territories, people are extremely frightened to unite and to discuss some topics, media literacy or something like that. So just read this research, and I think you'll get your answers. Thank you.
I'll add really quickly. There are some initiatives that are working on how to reach out to those audiences despite the blockings of Ukrainian media and etc. without the VPNs and other things. Not necessarily like about the fact-checking and media literacy, because, well, you cannot run a training on media literacy in occupied territories, right? It's like impossible. You would be, killed, arrested, whatever, and other horrible things. But at the same time, I think one of the issues is just reach with the content, and that's what some of the Ukrainian medias are doing in reaching out to those people, just to try to provide alternative version of not that being promoted predominantly on those territories. So this is part of the media literacy, but not traditional way of like how to discern falsehoods from truths trainings, but rather like to promoting the objective information that could be done from objective sources.
My question is about the journalists who are less obvious, but that are active here in the West, and that may be cited by some bloggers in Ukraine. We have our experience with a journalist who was not as obvious at first, but was quoted by bloggers in Ukraine with a Russian narrative. And then that journalist's article was repeated here by journalists who will write something about that journalist and then cite a link to the article, which simply amplifies and continues. So, would it be useful for journalists to have a tool in which journalists who are not as obvious are nevertheless rated in a way so that someone could look, either a blogger in Ukraine or a journalist here, to see this is what that person has written, and here is how what they wrote or she wrote cross-references to the Russian narratives, but maybe in a slighter, softer way, to be careful.
So any lists are bad, white lists or black lists. So I'll explain, because it always could be portrayed as like censorship or something, that you're like trying to silence the journalist if you put him or her into this list. So the better way is just to do due diligence before you providing a comment to the journalist, right? So you're like researching who he or she is before providing a commentary. I understand that it's sometimes really hard, especially like if you never heard about the outlet or something, but it should be done. And like any public list, it always could be gamed, right? If we consider that you're creating it, it will never be up to the time, because there are like new people are coming and going out of the like sphere and on the top of the issues that I just discussed before. So it's better never doing this, but it's rather how the journalist or the person who like interviews you frames the questions, what they are doing, and then if you see that your like words being like changed or like traversed into something else that you never said, like publicly denounce it and debunk it afterwards. It would be far more efficient than lists, because again, there is no guarantee that people will consult with those lists as well. So there are like a lot of problems with lists. I will not go this way. Hope it makes sense. That there is no easy fix, unfortunately.
Just by way of context, we tried what you said. In other words, we knew this journalist was aiming with the kinds of questions this journalist was asking. We knew exactly what they were going to write, and we had no way to stop them. And then when the articles came out, they got amplified by people who would not check to see what this journalist wrote. And by then it was too late. We found a new way last year, which is to say when that same journalist approached us with new questions, we knew exactly where they're going to go. We gave our answers in a public forum. We gave a public forum in social media where it would be seen. Here's our answers. And that way the journalist could not distort any further in the next article that they wrote. We're just trying to see how we can help others who will not do their due diligence to stop citing these kinds of journalists or giving them interviews, which will then just give them credibility, which is what happened in our situation.
Funny story, like kind of related. You know who also responds publicly to the questions and requests from media? Margot Simonyan. When there is like credible media asks her about something, she goes to her Telegram channels and just sends them off, like uncensored way, but like on her Telegram channel. It just reminded me, but it's not connected to her situation. It's funny coincidence.
Romana, can you tell me what is some of the greatest challenge that you have in the research that you've been working on? What are your biggest obstacles?
Stay sane? No, if you think seriously, yeah, I'm like, the people who are working in this field, like of counter and disinformation, like fact checkers, like an analyst, they're all like, most of them, I cannot say that all of them, but most of them are like neurotic type of the people who are like reading and getting into this, and like they have pretty bad outlook of the world. So I would say like not staying the same, but not getting polluted by this information. Like when you read a lot of the stuff that's been like toxic by itself, it's extremely hard sometimes to stay positively outlooked, because I can tell you 100 times that it doesn't influence me, but it certainly in some ways does, especially in the longer term when you do this like for a long period of time. So we should acknowledge that and understand that we should not fall for this like, I don't know, depression hole, I would say, like while reading this news, because reality is different. Like information, of course, that we perceive in like manifests itself in reality and like could create our reality. We believe in it. But the thing is that the world is much more robust and like wider than just the comments on Twitter.
I have a question for you too. So in your presentation, you were talking about how narratives have to be stronger than fact. So if we're dealing with disinformation and wrong narratives, how do we sort through and how do we get to fact?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think that we need also a catchy counter-narrative, but based on facts. We just disseminate like facts on social media, especially for young generations, especially, it won't be enough. I think that for Ukrainian media, and even now, it is very important to create narratives about fighting back. Because, for instance, when Odesa is shelled, I sometimes can see like the marks from the missiles. So I know that our air defense is protecting our city. So our military just do their job. So it is a reality, it is a fact. But unfortunately, when we speak about media, we usually see only this passive angle. So I think that it is very important for us not only just to disseminate facts, but create interesting, catchy narratives, as it was previously said, not only for some mass audience, but for small audiences. We should understand the Western people, not like the Western people, like the mass audience, but we should understand that there are different people with different strategies, with different interests, and we should propose these narratives based on facts.
When you mentioned that you could see that the Russian trolls, so to speak, they also had code that could measure the effect of what they were doing. Could you elaborate a bit more on that? Is it because they want to know if they're directing their messages in the right way? If you can see something from the code, if they're trying to measure how effective it is, because that's one of the big dilemmas always. You don't know if you're actually having effect when you're distributing misinformation.
Thank you very much for this question. Indeed, you never know how effective your campaign, right? So like in, I don't know, say in some commercial things, right, when you advertise the product and people are buying it, you kind of can measure it. In information operations, it's like a thinner line. You definitely cannot say for sure. It's not a code. It's like what we got is just some intercepted internal Russian documents that provide screenshots of the dashboards. So it's basic dashboard, like it is Russian internal presentation that when they screenshotted some kind of their internal software that showcases how many views specific videos received, how many comments, like reactions, interactions. So they are measuring how popular they were by checking what specific like messages were like the most, I don't know, used and liked by people the most, right? A separate thing, if you go deeper in those documents, I never discussed it in the presentation, but they are like separate department of the SDA, Struktura Digital Agency, if I remember correctly. They actually monitor information space and try to come up with an ideas of what to inject into information space. They are like working together, right? So there's a department that does produces content, like messages and cartoons, whatever. One analyzes what would be effective, and another one would be measuring how well those messages done on different platforms, why they're doing it. Of course, to understand whether they're efficient or not. But on the other hand, we need to understand that it's being done on behalf of Russian government, but not by Russian government necessarily. So there it's like, sure, people that are heading this company most likely are going to Kremlin for like some debriefs, but they are not like employees of the Kremlin necessarily. So like the trolls that are logging in, they are definitely not sitting in the Kremlin itself. This is subcontractor. So they are using these numbers to get more money from the Kremlin to run more operations, most likely. Again, it is all of these are assumptions. We cannot neither prove nor disprove them, but it seems logical because these things is the governmental contract most likely. So that's what they're trying to do with these dashboards. They do not it's for internal use. So this is their internal documents that we only got a glimpse of because they were leaked.
Nataliia, in your presentation, you said, you slightly mentioned cathedral, Transfiguration Cathedral that was bombed by Russians in 2023. And I really want to talk about this, extend this. We know that Russian Orthodox Church is actually a really big supporter of war, obviously, right? Patriarch Kirill, the head of Russian Orthodox Church, is making a lot of comments all the time. Not only him, but all officials. It's kind of interesting because he was the one who actually concentrated that cathedral in 2010 that was blown by Russians 13 years after this in 2023. And his comments about the destruction of the cathedral was, I am saddened by this, but Ukrainians did this. Obviously. But for me, question would be, we know a lot that Russian Orthodox Church is doing to dismantle Ukraine. They might try to disinformate people, especially the shepherds, about this. My question to you would be, do you feel a threat from Russian Orthodox Church in terms of disinformation? And kind of to both of you, do you use official websites of Russian Orthodox Church when you are studying disinformation, or do you actually just toss it out?
You know, Russian Orthodox Church is like this first guy from the joke about NATO and Russia fighting. This guy didn't understand in December 2022 that it is Russia who wants to destroy him, his city, everything. Russian Orthodox Church in Ukraine is something like that. So they see everything. So even their own cathedral was bombed. So they could die there, but they still trying to repeat all this Kremlin narrative. So of course they are a threat. I support intention to deal with them because of it. But it is not so easy because on the regional level they have their influence. And recently, for instance, our head of our region, not our major, but head of our war administration, he said Odesa was saved in 2022 because of attempts of our religious leaders who just prayed for Odesa very intensively, and this is also was a reason for Odesa to be saved. So it is an extremely complicated question, and of course they are a threat.
I would just quickly add to this, not necessarily the websites of the Russian Orthodox Church, but definitely what they're doing. And so for instance, when the Tomos and the introduction of Ukrainian Church was made, and its development continued nowadays, there are also here and there the narratives that it's not legitimate, that Ukraine tries to destroy the church, so it's against their freedom of religion and speech and everything else. So it's been used and instrumentalized. And of course, Russian church, I mean, you've probably seen those images of Pope, Christianized military weapons and tanks and whatever, and this military cathedral of the Russian MOD was being Shoigu canonized on the wall. They are definitely an instrument, but it's they're one of the institutions, right? The Russian MFA, Russian media, or something else. It's just one of the pillars. So definitely.
And I think I've got a Zoom question, and if we can squeeze in one more, I think there's one more question on the floor. Proszę.
Of course. So this question is coming from Ihor Stebsky. Were you able to see responses to specific Russian taunts or propaganda aimed at the Odessans? And the question is for Nataliia.
Maybe these pictures can be the answers. There were the pictures, street art of Odessa cats who describe as military guys who are trying to defend Odessa. So maybe it is an answer when common Odessa people just are trying to create their own story with their own art and so on and so forth. So of course, after every attack on the city, Odessa people just want to create their own story and they try to share it abroad, and it is very important for them to be heard.
My question will be to Roman. Thank you for showing this doppelganger leaked document. Have you been trying to match narratives presented in this leaked document that we saw in Afterbeat with the actual posting on this doppelganger site, everything that the social design agency have been doing online? Did that actually matches? Because we see some research from French authorities about RRN and other platforms, but I'm actually curious, did they match?
So in these documents, if you go at the affidavit, they set the objectives of what they want to achieve. So like what are the main objectives of the campaign? So it's like, and they coincide. So like my first slides is that they were based on like undermine trust in leadership and Ukrainian institutions, introduce clashes, etc. They based on the previous experience and not necessarily on doppelganger, like in the documents of the SDA. And surprisingly, they overlap pretty greatly. So the main like ideas and underlying targets and objectives that they are trying to achieve, I would say they are the same among all of those different campaigns. And then doppelganger, portal combat, operation overload, they're like working on different subsets of different tasks within the same domain. So the main general objectives are the same, basically win the war, right? All other things is just like they are just focusing on a particular part of this thing. So it's either to overwhelm journalists, like Operation Overload, doppelganger just like sow distrust and negative information, and some others like do additional tasks within this whole domain to win the war, right? So I would say they are overlapping. And again, most of these operations, it's deliberate division. We do not even know whether they're different or not. So like it might be just, I don't know, another person sitting in the same room and we're calling it like different operation in the end. We cannot prove or disprove it, right? That's the problem. But all in all, they are using the same guidelines and the same like objectives and goals.
Щиро дякую. Романе, Наталю, дякую.